Um, I'm so excited to chat with Katya today. Katya was one of the first interviews we did at Helio when Full Frame was kind of in the early stages of winding down. And we are now talking like a year later. So it's like a very different context and space, but I think it's really exciting to both sort of speak about the story that's captured in the article and then a little bit more about sort of like, yeah, where that experience and thinking has evolved. And I, from the first moment, Katya was just like, I don't know, like expanded my vision of possibilities and how I was thinking about things and also like grounded in the values that mattered so much to me in our world. So, anyways, I'm so excited to introduce you. Can you tell us like a little bit about, yeah, like you and how we got into the space of good endings? Like, tell us the story.
Thank you, Jess. I am excited to be here too because I love any chance I can get to talk about how much my thinking has completely changed and evolved over the last couple of years about this.
Yeah.
So I have founded and I guess exited two nonprofits. So I've been leading nonprofit organizations for 30 out of the last 31 years. And I think I spent 28 of those years thinking of we might have to close as like the radioactive thing in the corner. And it wasn't like always on the radar screen, but stuff happens, right? The stock market, like whatever it is, like big things, happen and you're finding something. And every, I don't know, 7 years or something, like something comes along and you have to pivot or whatever it is. And like, oh my God, we might have to close.
I mean, it feels like every 6 months now, but yeah, same.
Yeah. And right now, right, like everybody's on like craziness. And it was almost like defining my success as a leader by how far away from that we could get and stay and never examining it. And so at treating it like this radioactive thing. And what I now think about it as is it's the monster under the bed. And I never had a flashlight and I never had the guts to look under the bed and to say, oh, yeah, there's something on that under there, but it's not a monster and it's not going to eat me and I can even dance with it. I don't know whether you dance with a monster under your bed, but whatever. The metaphor may have run its course. Um, so the Full Frame Initiative, as of 2024, had been around for almost 20 years, doing national social change work, lots of demand, lots of impact, lots of always hard to raise money for, but in the wake of COVID, we were seeing how much harder it was getting to get truly aligned systems change funding that wasn't long enough term, flexible enough, all the things that we needed. And so we were looking at sort of down the road at resource scarcity. We were recognizing that staff were really hard to find and took a long time to onboard, and any staff turnover as we were shrinking through attrition made us more, sort of more fragile. And there were a couple of really high profile closures that in the year prior that had made my blood kind of run cold, in part because all the stories were told with an eye on the organization and maybe the staff, and never about what the impact was, and maybe something about what was going to happen because the organization wasn't around. But these were all implosions, like sort of violent, and there was never any acknowledgement of broken promises of what it means to a community if there's no notice given. And so we in October 2024, our board made a decision to begin a wind down. We were not out of money. We had almost 6 months in the bank and we had some funding coming in. So this was looking down the road. Um, and, but it came from a place of saying an organization is not a mission. And although we were seeing it was getting harder and harder to get money, we were incredibly capitalized relationally. And right, we had all these champions and all these partners around the country doing this work who were super psyched about the work. And so we decided to close with this idea of of seeing the closure of the organization as a chance for the mission to live on in a different form, to be determined in a way that only could happen if we actually had a runway. And so that's what we decided to do. And I really approached that as a harm reduction journey. Right? How do we do this in a way that is going to reduce the harm, what I now call the harms of how, like really bad process around closure that creates trauma in and of itself? How do we do that? How do we co-create with our partners, the people that are going to take this on? They should be designing how that's going to happen. And how do we do it in a way that we can't do this without amazing people. So we need our people to stick around, but how do we do it in a way that both supports them and that doesn't, where they really are also part of it. But that was all harm reduction. And what I will say, one of the huge lessons I have learned is that when you do an ending well, when you leave community well, when you leave your staff, when your staff leave each other well, when we leave each other well, there is work that can happen. There's a level of power shifting. There is a level of designing something new that you cannot do if you are still going to be around. And so I now look at this as, wow, ending can be a highly strategic move if it's done well. And it's not for everybody, and I don't think everybody should go around ending all the time, but I do think that it is so far from the radioactive thing in the room, and it actually probably isn't even a monster under the bed. It's something that we have made really scary that we need to see as part of organizational life, and leaving each other is part of being human.
I love what you just said there. I think there's so much, I think, in terms of like we use the words endings, right? And like those places and those spaces, but it's all evolution, right? Like even as you're talking, it's like full frame in the shape was ending, but the work is continuing in the communities. And because you're, I'm going to say like having tea with the monster under the bed, right? Like it's kind of like, oh, like I'm scared, it's like, oh no, I'm going to go here. I'm going to see it. You can think about, is that the right thing? And if it is the right thing, how do we do that really well in a way that like everyone gets to feel good about? Because as you're saying, like we're human, like, like we can pretend it's an organization versus a human or like all the things, but like it all, like we're all in the same experience of like humanity and living and breathing and like going through all the cycles and they're going to cycle and they're going to shift. So how do you embrace them versus like the radioactive thing in the corner? Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been thinking about even like how much pivoting is happening right now for organizations, and how, part of what our decision was this sense that we were going to spend a few years investing in like the health, like the organization, like feeding the beast of the organization if we kept going. And it wasn't for sure that FFI was going to need to close at any point.
Yeah.
It was that sort of sense of, is that where we should be putting our energy to? And recognizing, well, that's always part of like managing time and attention is basically what you're doing if you're trying to be a leader. And we needed to do that for the organization, and to recognize that what we thought was the right thing to do was certainly not going to be seen that way by lots and lots of people. Something that we have to reckon with.
Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about both of those things. So I'd love like when you say like feeding the organization, like what does that mean? Like if you could define that a little bit. And then I really want to get into how like the courage it took to be like this is not going to be popular to everyone, right? Like I know this feels right, but like, now we have to go through the whole space of what our world expects.
So anybody who's led anything over the last 30 years, like we've had plenty of busts and plenty of booms and other things. So this was not the sort of my first rodeo with like potential downtimes or looking ahead, but something felt really different to me and to our board chair around like the whole ecosystem that we're in is responding in the wrong ways to the messages around uncertainty and around systems change. And there was just a sense that we were going to be spending more and more energy managing that and trying to get really scarce dollars that were already scarce and now they're crazy scarce, and in ways that at the very least was going to mean that I was spending basically all my time fundraising and maybe hiring to fill an open position on the leadership team and bringing people on and other stuff. And there are times in an organization's life cycle where, of course, that's kind of what you have to do, right? But we were going to be basically in a build mode just to survive.
That's helpful.
And that didn't feel right, because it also felt like this was the moment that our work was most needed and has the most promise. And that's because systems change comes when there's disruption and you can insert a new way of people seeing things into the ether. But
Yeah.
we were going to be less and less able to do that because we were more and more concerned with just, is this organization going to be here in a year or two? And what, right? And I use the metaphor of like a star dying. And if a star can collapse in and on itself and you end up with a black hole and it sucks in everything around it and it's just darkness. A star can also, I hope there are no astrophysicists who watch this because it's a little oversimplified, but a star can also explode and be a supernova and it puts all its energy out into the universe.
I love
right? And like leads lots of baby stars and lots of other things. And we wanted to be a supernova.
that's such a good analogy. I love that. Yeah. And so how did that carry through? Because there is a like I'm closing, I don't know, stigma. Like it feels like failure, right? Like every time I've closed, ended, quit, like done anything, there's some sort of I internalize some sense of like I have failed. Even when it's actually a supernova, which I'm very into this analogy. But yeah, like say more about kind of what that experience is and like how you think that can shift and change because that's what I feel really excited about in your work and how you talk about it is like you showed a different way. Like you went and did it. And now you're like, yeah, and let's normalize that. Let's talk about it and let's share how that happened, which I just think is so cool.
There is so much shame. There's no real way to fail as a nonprofit other than to close. I would be seen if we were still hanging on. I would be seen as a leader showing grit and showing all these other things and whatever and like willing to do whatever it takes, right? And because we've closed, there's a whole narrative around whatever that is. I don't know, easy way out or something else, right? And I think that that's very real in our sector. And I think what that comes from, one, is a larger endings illiteracy in our culture, right? We just do everything we can to avoid talking about ending.
Yeah.
We don't know how to actually leave each other, even though we all know how important it is to be left well and the difference between being left well and being left badly. We all know in our bones that if you want to understand power in any relationship between people or between institutions or institutions and people, look at who feels like they can leave and look at who feels like they are going to be left.
Yes, yes.
Right? So all these things we say we care about in our sector are there in leaving. And because we don't have any ways of doing it. So this is all things I've come to realize. But back in the fall of 2024, I think what was it that felt less important to me than not creating harm.
Mm.
And we did disappoint people. And I don't mean like, look at me, I'm an angel. But I to be really honest, like I had been really like staying anchored in values when you're leading through the chaos, even of 2024, let alone now, is really hard. And I think our board chair had this moment of clarity where we were like, this is a values-based decision. And what do our values say we have to do? Our values say we have to insulate, we have to own more risk. We have to get our funders to own more risk instead of shifting all the risk onto community, which is normally what happens. And if we are about owning risk when things are tough, then it wasn't too far for us to say, so then we need to close, but we need to close well. And Full Frame had always been about how do we do the thing and allow ourselves to be sometimes misunderstood, but hopefully also create new space for people to think about things differently. And so we just thought, well, if we're going to do this, since I'm going to be labeled a failure by some people anyway, we might as well do it as a supernova. Like we might as well try and do it. And as a white leader, I thought, well, maybe we can, if we can get some traction around this, it may create some cover. It may help a less, and not just because of skin color, but just a less capitalized organization, a less capitalized leader in making this decision and being able to say, no, 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 see, we're doing it like not just FFI, but a handful of organizations that said this is the right thing to do for our mission, even if it means the organization will no longer be around. And I don't know, there just was something in that that felt so clear at a time when everything else felt so like on the one end, on the other end, on the like right, like, and feeling like I was always right up to the line on with funders around like, like like not never going over the line for like this is completely against our mission, but just feeling like all the poles on your mission. And so to be able to actually anchor in values and then say, so how do we close? Well, we use our well-being design principles, and we use the tools we have. We actually may know how to do this better than we think.
Mm.
And that felt actually so heartbreaking and so sad. And also, so there was a part of it that felt liberatory. And there are still plenty of days where I feel like I must have failed somewhere. Like, I'm going to be real. But I also felt like that sometimes when I was leading. It's not like, right? Like, I don't
It's not
think
binary. Yeah.
it's not that if we'd continued, I would have felt like super proud of myself all the time.
Yeah.
So I just try and hold that like, I'm just going to feel crappy about myself some days. What's happening?
Well, I think again, this is like human existence, right? Things evolve, things shift, they end. We have days that feel amazing, we have days that feel hard. But I think what I'm hearing from you is so much around as you look back and reflect. And I heard this in our first conversation as well, like this feels right. Like this feels right in my soul and my being, and it feels right to what I've built and what I've created and like the world I want to live in. And so you saw that through. And there are days that feels like a supernova, and there are days that feels like, ooh, was it? But at the end of the day, like following through and living that, like what a beautiful, I loved when you use the word liberatory, because it is. It's like, no, we're going to listen to communities. We're going to honor the values. We're going to center kind of the work and the experience and all of those things. And we're going to center what I know as the leader of this organization feels right, and drive towards that. Which I'm grateful for, because I think it's hard to share those stories, and it's hard to go against the grain, and it's hard to want to celebrate. And I just am so grateful that you give voice to it and honor it. Yeah.
I think there are a couple things that made it possible for us to do, which I think are really important to name.
Yeah.
One is we had a number of funders who answered affirmatively my request for more money. I knew that we needed more money to close well. And sometimes it took some convincing, because there is this sense of like, well, if you're closing, that puts all of our previous investment into like cast it differently. Like, was that a bad investment? Was those failed grants? There's some walking through we have to do with philanthropy around if they want to preserve their impact, right? One more grant basically helps lock in the impact that they already paid for. And if we have to close more suddenly, then we should it discounts the value. I mean, you can frame it in these ways that are very unpersonal, right? But basically the math is pretty clear. One more grant, what I'm now calling a tail grant, can make a huge difference. And is part of the legacy of not just the organization, but of that funding. And so but the bottom line is we were able to get more funding, which allowed us to stay around longer. It allowed us to go to our partners much more frequently than we, be on more airplanes and on the road, to create a legacy website and to offer real severance and retention packages to the kick-ass group that stuck around and did this amazing work. So I think that there's a lot that that made our situation honestly kind of different, and that's not a reason to then not do it, but that is a reason why I'm now doing what I'm doing, which is launching this endeavor, this 5-year project called While Leaving, that is to create and then introduce and socialize the idea that how we leave each other matters, and particularly how philanthropy leaves nonprofits matter, and how nonprofits leave communities matter. And if what we really care about is centering community and community voice, engagement, all these other things, then we need to center community as we learn to disengage. We can't just engage. We need to also understand that disengagement is part of good practice sometimes. And it takes money and it takes narrative shifts and it takes all these other things. But I think that we are at a moment of what I'm calling leaving at scale, right? I mean, that is what's happening in the workforce and society. Like we're surrounded by leaving. And we have this opportunity, not just in our sector, but that's where I have the most experience. We have this opportunity to do what I saw happening at FFI. What happened for me, I'll just talk about myself, but I've heard this from other people, that what I realized in that process is just the layers of feeling left and misunderstood and angry that I had from 50 odd years of it. And not in a woe is me sense, but around how scared I have become of being left. And that and that has led me to leave badly and to separate badly and to do, in ways that also are driven by lawyers and other people and all sorts of reasons that our society makes it hard, right? But that fundamentally I had a narrative that didn't allow me to really believe that there was a different way of doing it that still resulted in an ending.
Mm.
And that still acknowledged loss and heartache and grief and anger, but that also could have joy and celebration and like crazy ass stories that you can't even make up, but that you're going to share with people forever and ever. Right? Like all that stuff. My understanding and my own thinking about abandonment and being left is so different because of this experience.
Mm.
So I think about like, and I have heard that from other staff at FFI. I've heard that from community folks that we worked with who are like, no one has ever asked us about how they should leave before. And I just think about like, well, what would happen in our country if we got better at this?
Yeah.
Like, and so we have this opportunity now to do something about it.
Mm. I love that. All right, as we wrap up, one more question. What does our world look like in 5 years with your project? What
Mm.
feels different? What looks different? What are you imagining?
That there is a sense of accountability and not in a drag way, but in a like values driven way
Mm.
around around leaving and disengagement and an understanding that leaving is how we are remembered. It is where our legacy is cemented. Leaving is where our values are on fullest display.
Mm.
And that it is such, and when we do it, so in 5 years, there's not a grudging investment in it, a grudging doing it, but a sense that when we do this,
Mhm.
can and should and want to do it well. And we can survive on the other side of it because there are amazing things also that happen when you do it well, like all these other doors open up, which is kind of weird and unexpected for me and amazing.
Good endings are possible.
Good endings are possible. And it doesn't mean they don't hurt like hell, but sometimes continuing hurts like hell too.
Yeah. I love this so much. I love getting to hear you talk about this. So I hope that like so many people are like calling you and scheduling you and like letting you share the full frame story and all your learnings and experiences and like that our world looks and feels that way because I think good endings are possible. And I think about all the layers and ways that celebrating that and normalizing that and sharing that, like, yeah, what beautiful things that can exist in the world. Thank
Thank
you.
you. And thank you for being one of the first people to say, this is important and we can have a place that is joyous as Helia is and acknowledge how important this is. And you were one of the first people to say that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.